Back to Open Line, it's Ask the Mayor. We also have Lucy Kemp here, Metro Planning Director. Thank you for being with us both. And I know we have Ann, Brian, and Ronald on the phone. I wanted to sneak in one question. The Vice Mayor election is coming up for folks who live in Davidson County. You have unique perspective on that. Being Vice Mayor for how long?
Well, not long, actually. I guess I was a little bit more than 2 years, 2.5 years.
And I mean, clearly we can see how important the position is to pick someone wisely. There are 3 people running. I'm not going to ask your pick. I don't think that's appropriate.
No. You can ask, but I won't answer.
Okay, I was saying, unless you want to divulge, then I'd be happy to learn.
Well, I've worked with 2 of them, and they're both fine people. So.
But I would ask you to depart some wisdom on folks who have the opportunity to vote about why this position is important.
Well, you never know what's going to happen.
That's right.
I'd say you start with that. The Vice Mayor's role is pretty unique in Nashville compared to virtually any other city in the country. Most places it's elected from the legislature and not from not a general election. And so you're electing somebody who is going to be in the position of making very subtle difference when it comes to the operation of the council. You don't really have the ability to push or pull or legislate, really. It's really more about influence and convincing people to think about a particular thing one way or another. It's a lot about knowing the rules of the council, because the meetings really can get off into the ditch or last very long if you don't have a good understanding of the rules. And so there are moments where the Vice Mayor is, very important. It's not at all times, just like every other elected official, but I guess 2 years ago we had a group of protesters take the council over.
Yes.
And I was fortunate enough to get good advice and listen to my colleagues, and I think I made a good decision so that we averted having a crisis in the room and nobody got arrested. We weren't on CNN the next day, with I don't mean to mention a competitor.
No, that's okay. We don't really compete with them, so it's okay.
There are going to be these critical moments where the Vice Mayor is going to be in a position to direct the city in one way or another, and so it's an important decision for people to make, and I think they ought to look closely at the candidates who are running.
And we've had a lot of elections lately, but don't let election fatigue stand in your way. Early voting starts Friday.
It does.
And the election is August 2nd, just so you know.
And I think it probably will be, I'm guessing, like the last thing on the ballot. There'll be all the governor and Senate and all these other things first.
Yeah, so go all the way down. Okay, and I should have said in-part wisdom, not D-part wisdom. I hate when I do that. Okay, let's go to Ann. She's on the line. Ann, thank you for being with us. What's your question?
My question is, there's an organization or a community group, Community Oversight Now, that is active in Nashville right now, and I know how Megan Berry felt about this group, and I'd like to know how our new mayor feels about this organization.
And what organization was that? I didn't catch. Did you catch it?
Community Oversight Now.
Community Oversight Now. So it's a group of Nashvillians who are right now gathering signatures to put a measure on the ballot that would essentially create a citizens oversight board to review police conduct, complaints related to police conduct. And so I support their their right to gather signatures and put it on the ballot and let the people decide whether or not to proceed in that direction. I'm more focused on other aspects as it relates to policing. We're in the process of gathering data to look closely at how we're policing, to see if there are ways to police better, to cost our community less, both socially and economically as we police, and really get out on the front end of it to avoid situations where you're bringing complaints and having problems that need to be resolved by a citizens oversight board. We'll see what happens with their initiative, and if it succeeds, then we'll go in one direction. If not, I'll certainly take a look at it going forward.
What I hear you saying, it's not your favorite idea, but you're not against it?
Well, I have not looked closely at what they are actually proposing.
Okay.
So I'm going to let them run with what they're doing.
Gotcha.
And not get in the way of that. Once they're done, if it passes, we'll implement it. If it does not pass, I have some other ideas about citizen review of police misconduct cases that I've committed to the police and to the chief to work with them and with the community to make sure that we can come up with a solution at the end. You know, I'm not really commenting on theirs. I'm just going to let that play its own course.
Okay, fair enough. Let's go to Brian. He's on the line. Brian, thank you for your patience. What's your question tonight?
Well, I was going to say one or two different things, but after listening to the mayor, I got to say that there are more Democratic, Republican type mayor politicians in Nashville than I've seen like around a lot of the country. It reminds me of like either a Blue Dog Democrat or Blue Dog Democrat or a left-leaning Republican. They're very centrist and they're very protective of the business of Nashville, which is tourism and country music. They're very cultivational of that. They keep it in the palm of their hands, the men of power and politicians in Nashville. And Nashville's funny because it's one of very few states in the country where the largest city is also the state capital. And I met the mayor. He probably remembers me because I worked the City magazine with Andrew Cameron. We met down in Prentice Alley in 2008. I don't know if he remembers me. But
Brian, what's your question?
Well, my question is, when you let the one guy go who was a city planning guy, I don't know if he's a city planning guy, he was a big backer of giving,
Rich Riebling.
In this industry, big discounts. Tax increment financing, are you in agreement with getting rid of that, or have they already, or are they getting rid of that? You don't have to do less than tax increment financing is basically giving discounts for businesses to come here, because we don't need that anymore. We can use that money, to pay for stuff like road improvements, more police in the streets, education, maybe the schools could use a little money. I don't know.
Brian, you bring up some good points because you have made some changes recently in your staffing. Rich Riebling, some people praise him, say we are here as a city because of him. Others say we've given a lot away and now we're in a budget crisis. So he was one of the changes you made. Expand upon this a little bit, would you?
Well, I mean, I think people need to read the stories closely about Rich's departure. Rich was ready to leave. It was his decision to move on and do something else. I actually asked him to stay a little bit longer with the transition. So in no sense did I get rid of Rich Riebling. That's not a fair assessment of what happened. But I think the issue about tax increment financing is important to talk about. And what needs to be said about it is that if you look at our community right now, we have invested a significant amount of our taxes in tax increment financing, and we do a $500 a job incentive for businesses to relocate here. We've done a fair amount of that, and we need to be cautious about doing it going forward because we can't do it forever.
Right.
However, if you look back at the last decade or two and look at all of the things that came to Nashville as a result of those investments, I think any neutral assessment of that would say that overall those investments were great for our city. We would not be at the same level that we are at right now unless we had done that. Now, has everyone worked out exactly like we had wanted? No. But I think if you look at it overall, they've been good investments for the city, and we certainly wouldn't be where we are economically right now without having made those investments.
Okay, very good. Let's move on to Ronald, who's been hanging on the line. Ronald, thank you for being there. What's your question?
Yes, I want to know, like, in East Nashville, they are moving all the urban people out of East Nashville and jacking up the price of living, so, like, they are catering to everybody else but the urban folks.
Yeah, this is a big concern in a lot of areas of Nashville. The gentrification, hard word, gentrification, it's just kind of taken over. People are just being pushed out. They can't afford to live there anymore. How do you all combat this from a planning perspective?
I think this is one of the fundamental planning questions for us and for any city that's growing the way that we are. East Nashville is a great example where you have a lot of historic homes. You've got a lot of families who have been there for generations, and there is new investment. And I think some of the new investment can be good, but as you say, if it's pushing families out and there are equity issues, then it can become a problem. And I think that links to a related issue, which is how we address affordable housing in our community. I can't think of a city in our country that's growing quickly that isn't confronting an issue of affordable housing. And we have a few different tools that we're trying to use today to work through questions of affordable housing. They're not always adequate, but we're gonna keep at it.
Didn't we just have a groundbreaking perhaps last week for a site where really it's going to encourage city workers, police officers, teachers?
Yeah, so over in Bordeaux, we broke ground on a townhome project that's going to be housing that's attainable to the typical firefighter or teacher in our town. So, and that's a MDHA development, and so it's the kind of thing we're going to need to do to try and stabilize some of the neighborhoods that are subject to such gentrification right now. Lucy was kind not to point out the fact that in a lot of other cities they have a lot more tools than we have here in Nashville.
Like what?
We had tried to do something called inclusionary zoning, which would require developers to incorporate a certain percentage of attainable units into all of their developments, and the state prohibits us from doing that. That's a pretty typical tool being used across the country to stabilize neighborhoods and maintain some attainable housing. Other places have had certain levels of rent control, which have helped. Well, there's a big argument about how much it helps, but in some instances it clearly has helped. We can't do that by law either. So we are limited more than a lot of other cities our size in terms of the tools we have available to us. And so we have a very limited set of options, really. We can add density, which means different types of housing in different types of neighborhoods. We can spend money to build it, and we can start to think about new types of housing that is a much smaller unit to try and address, especially housing for the homeless. So unfortunately we don't have all the tools that a lot of other places have, so we're going to have to be more creative. We're going to have to ask the private sector and have to ask the philanthropic community to step up and help us more in Nashville than maybe other communities, and I'm convinced that they will help us as time comes along. But it's clearly a very big problem for our community.
It most certainly is. I mean, you just drive down one of these streets and you see a home that's been there for decades next to this brand new build, and you can tell things just don't look right anymore. I mean, it's as easy as that, right? All right, that's a question we'll continue to ponder here. We're going to take another quick break. When we come back, more of your calls. Stay with us.